A few of you might notice a little change in the poster arrangement here. This came with purchase of the CD at the record store, and now it's pretty much a permanent part of the background of my videos. I kinda like this album, is what I'm saying. Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Spinner Reviews, and today I'm going to be talking about the new album from Weezer called Everything Will Be Alright in the End. Okay, confession time. Despite being a big music fan for a long time, I can never really narrow down an answer whenever someone asks the question of what's my favorite band or what's my favorite album of all time. However, one band and one album I can always put as sort of a contender are Weezer and their 1994 debut album better known as the Blue Album. To me, despite not being the most diverse album in the world, it's easily one of the more well-rounded rock albums you're ever going to find. And between the crunchy power chords balanced really well with the ridiculously catchy melodies, the lyrics that perfectly towed the line between the fun, clever, charming, ironic, nerdy, poetic, emotional, and introspective, and from Rivers Cuomo's very matter-of-fact, earnest voice and delivery, there's a reason why their unique mix of garage rock, alt rock, and power pop made such an impact back when they broke onto the scene with singles like Buddy Holly and Say It Ain't So and the Sweater Song. However, given I was born a month after their sophomore album Pinkerton came out, naturally I got into this band a bit late, sometime around 2010 to 2011, but when I did get into them, I really got into them pretty much immediately. Not to mention that as an amateur musician and songwriter, I've really started gradually looking up to Rivers as someone to sort of emulate, with that tricky lyrical balance, certain musical elements, and the ability to sound melodically good singing lead, even if the technical ability vocally is a bit limited. Now, after the Blue Album is where things get a bit complicated, and that's where I got to throw out a bit of an unpopular opinion. There isn't a single Weezer album that I don't like. While not every album of theirs is great front to back, there's still some kind of positive superlative I can give to nearly every one of them. The Blue Album, like I said, is their most well-rounded and relatable. Pinkerton is their most transparently personal and emotionally immersive. The Green Album is the closest they've gotten to classic power pop. Maladroit is their roughest and heaviest. The Red Album is their most diverse. Raditude is their poppiest. You get the idea. Even on albums like the spotty, Hurley, and Make Believe, or total guilty pleasures like Raditude, there's still enough gems on each one for me to at least give them all a pass.
That being said, I'd be lying if I said I didn't get why people have been giving Weezer crap for at least a decade now, since there's no denying that their albums as a whole have gotten a bit less substantial as the years have gone by, especially on those last two and some of the more lyrically lame moments on the Red Album.
And this brings us to their new album, Everything Will Be Alright in the End, which shows their longest break between albums since their mid-90s hiatus from after Pinkerton bombed. And especially coming off the heels of 3 albums in 3 years, that's a pretty long wait. Now, this album was being heavily touted by the band as being a return to form to those early days, which in a way is both a good and bad sign. I mean, obviously this is what the fans have been wanting for a long time, but would this just mean pandering and just taking a step back in terms of their evolution as artists? In a nutshell, not in the slightest. I'm going to make a bold claim here. This is their best album since Pinkerton. See, even on those post-hiatus ones I love, I can still admit there being a few filler tracks or an over-reliance on formula or some seriously questionable lyrical choices. Here, though, everything comes together pretty much perfectly in such a great, thoughtful way. You can really hear why there is such a gap before this album because of how multi-layered and detailed and frankly ambitious this thing is when compared to their other releases. Okay, going from general stuff to slightly less general stuff, the thing that'll stick out to most people at first about this album is the overall sound. Rick Ocasek from The Cars, who previously did the Blue and Green albums, is producing here, and it's pretty easy to tell. The guitars have a lot of distorted punch and drive and energy, but never to the point of feeling messy or like they're drowning out the great melodies. This album has a way of just pulling from certain periods of Weezer's discography to make the career retrospective theme of this album work even better. Lonely Girl, The British Are Coming, and Da Vinci have the straightforward power pop appeal of some of the best songs on Blue, Green, Red, Make Believe. Ain't Got Nobody, Eulogy for a Rock Band, and Go Away call back to the slightly more rough around the edges feel of Pinkerton, and the bridge of Cleopatra has a really Maladroit-like crunch to it in the bridge. But at the same time, that doesn't mean there isn't room for new territory. I Powered Up to Here has these nice staccato, almost dancey chords in the verses. The lead single, Back to the Shack, has a really cool classic riff rock feel to it in parts. Go Away might be the first straight-up duet Weezer's ever done, this being co-written and performed with LA indie surf rock duo Best Coast, which is really cool, both because I like Best Coast and because it's really cool to see Weezer sort of keeping up with who they've influenced and promoting them along the way. And it worked extremely well. Bethany Costantino's voice fits in really well with the sound of the song, and it's easily one of the catchiest on the whole album. But the most notable left turn comes in the form of the last three tracks, The Wasteland, Anonymous, and Return to Ithaca, dubbed collectively as the Futurescope Trilogy, which clocks in at over 7 minutes, and for good reason. Between the insane 5-part guitar solo, piano breakdown, choral backing vocals, multiple tempo changes, and long instrumental breaks with a good amount of chord progression shifts, this really only rivals Greatest Man That Ever Lived as Weezer's most awesomely multifaceted song. This is all without touching on the most interesting, creative, and frankly brilliant thing about this album, the lyrics. Now, one thing I'm always a sucker for is when a songwriter can effectively be meta. Bayside did this fantastically earlier this year with the song Stuttering, and this is basically a whole album of that. The really surprising thing about this turn is that even though Rivers has consistently been a great songwriter musically, self-awareness hasn't exactly been one of his strong suits as of late. But Everything Will Be Alright in the End changes that completely and finds different ways of lacing this sort of self-commentary theme into nearly every song on this album, and it really works wonders. Back to the Shack is the most blatant example of this, which makes it a good sort of mission statement for the album, and a logical choice for this first single. It pretty much lays everything out on the table clear as day, admitting to making some past mistakes, but pointing out how he's really matured as a person, that he's simply not the same guy that wrote the Blue Album 20 years ago, though that doesn't mean he can't still rock out with that same amount of punch. I've had it up to here follows along slightly similar lines, though with a bit of a twist. In the verses he's talking about taking his artistic integrity back and just not being willing to write these simple and personal pop songs for the masses anymore. But then in the chorus he turns it around on the audience, saying that he tried to go ultra deep and personal with Pinkerton and ended up failing on all fronts initially. So later on he went in a more reactionary, more populist direction, only to be bashed later on by those same people who now love Pinkerton all of a sudden. It's a song where Rivers rightfully just throws up his hands and says screw it to both the charts and the picky fans to just do what he wants. And it really brings that sort of subtly sarcastic feel in Back to the Shack and just puts it right in the spotlight. Still, it's not like this album is all in your face with that message. There's still a few like Ain't Got Nobody, Da Vinci, and little parts of Lonely Girl where if you listen closely enough you can hear the metaphor in there, but you can also just really enjoy it on the surface as Weezer's brand of either goofy love songs or sort of relationship laments. And it would work great either way. Going more toward the back half, the 1-2 punch of Cleopatra and Foolish Father show Rivers sort of tackling aging and maturing, with Foolish Father especially being a really heartfelt message to his kids, basically apologizing for any stupid stuff he might do along the way as he's transitioning through life. And Anonymous ties it all together perfectly, where using very few lines, he basically looks his personal life, his career, his writing, and his future in the face, and makes the promise that he's going to have that balance between having control and taking charge, and just letting things come as they may, while always making sure to be honest in his music from this point forward, summed up perfectly in the last unrepeated lines. So I look at my life, look at my friends, look in the eyes of my enemy, it's all just a gift I'm going to give to you. So yeah, in case you're not a true deductive master, I love this album. Plain and simple. Any negatives I might have are the tiniest of nitpicks. Like, I would have switched around Back to the Shack and Eulogy of the Rock Band on the track list for the sake of narrative, and I would have made the Futurescope Trilogy one long song under the name Anonymous, which I might actually do in iTunes later on. Plus, the lyrics of The British Are Coming haven't really connected with me beyond the surface level revolution imagery, though I'm sure I will at some point, and it's still an awesome song all things considered. This is a fantastic return form for Weezer, and an easy 9.5 for me. Look, I'm not usually the kind to say that opinions are wrong, but if you honestly listen to this and tell me that you still miss the old Weezer, I'm sorry, you're delusional from the nostalgia goggles, plain and simple. So if any of you guys have heard this album, what do you think of it? Do you agree with what I had to say, disagree, have any feedback about the channel in general? Let me know in the comments down below. I'm sure this around with anyone who might be interested, like the Facebook page in the description for updates, commentaries, music news, and reviews of older albums, and hopefully I'll see you in the next episode of Spin It Reviews. Your move, Rentals. Now that all being said, there's still one more thing I want to know. When are we getting the finished version of Songs from Black Hole already? Seriously, I made my own track list from the leaks a few years ago, and that thing has some serious potential.